Here we go. Excellent. So hello, everyone. I'm Julian Gray, and I'm Director of the Southwest Coast Path Association and Vice Chair of the World Trails Network. And I'd like to give a very warm welcome to all of you around the world joining us for this, the 8th webinar in the World Trails Network Trails Talk series. So the focus of today's webinar is trails and climate change. This important subject has been chosen so we can discuss the impacts, mitigations and challenges of how trails and trail organisations address climate change with the backdrop of COP26 and global discussions on how governments rise to this challenge. So already at COP26, we've seen commitments made around reforestation, green finance and stopping coal. However, there's still much more that needs doing if we're going to hold the line at 1.5 degree rise in global temperatures. And since the Rio Convention in 1995, yes, I am that old, I have followed the COP conventions with a mixture of hope and exasperation. So 27 years later, we're really up against the hard choices in how we want to impact not just our own children's lives, but the livelihood of people around the world who are impacted by climate change now. So I'd like to join me in welcoming members of the World Trails Network Trails and Sustainability International Task Team, who will be leading the discussion in today's webinar. It's great to see representations from so many different trails and organisations around the world joining us today. So for those of you who've joined previous trail talks, so I'm just having to admit people as I chat. So you'll be familiar with today's format. We're going to have a number of short presentations to help set the agenda. Then it's over to all of us so we can have a discussion around the issue and how we as a network can continue to address climate change and what are our priorities as we lead up towards the World Trails Conference in 2022. As such, it'd be good if you can keep your questions to the Q&A session, which will take up the second half of this hour-long webinar. And also please note we're recording this webinar, so it will be made available afterwards. So for the next 20 minutes or so, members of the Trails and Sustainability Task Team will highlight the scope of our work, starting with Nat Scrimshaw, who is the co-chair of the task team. We'll then have examples from a couple of trails, the Trans-Bhutan Trail and the Trans-Canada Trail, to highlight the impacts of climate change. And those impacts which we're already having on our trails and what mitigation measures are being taken and planned. Finally, we'll then look quickly at the policy framework and tools we're developing to help trail managers and organisations address climate change impacts and wider sustainability of our trails and the landscapes they traverse. So before I hand over to Nat, just a quick bit of virtual housekeeping. So when we get to the Q&A session, please, if you can, and you've got the bandwidth, switch on your videos and use the virtual hand raising button so I can see and keep a tally of when people are raising their hands, and I can ask you to direct your question to whoever's the relevant person on the panel. And I'd now like to hand over to Nat Scrimshaw, who is Chair of the World Trails Network Hub for the Americas and co-chair of the Trails and Sustainability International Task Team. Welcome, Nat.
Thank you, Julian, and good morning or good evening or whatever time of day it is for all of you. So I'll begin this this session by talking a little bit about what the Trails and Sustainability Task Team is. First, just to say that the World Trails Network International Task Teams are working groups that meet between the World Trails conferences that we have every 2 years. In addition to talking about various issues, we also engage in projects which we then present at the next conference. Early on with the Trails and Sustainability Task Team, we made a distinction between sustainable trails and trails and sustainability. What that means is that we can consider a trail design, it's whether it's trail slope alignment or looking at erosion control, on a very specific and local level. And what we decided early on is that we wanted to look at the issue of sustainable trails in a broader way. So we wanted to understand how trails fits into the larger issue of sustainability, of sustainable communities, of sustainable economies, of a sustainable environment. So when we decided to do that, we embraced the three pillars of sustainability, the environmental sphere, the economic sphere, and the sociocultural sphere as part of how we were going to, the lenses that we were going to use to look at sustainability. We also realized early on that scale matters. We could be looking at a very local situation in a community or a particular problem on a trail, but we could also consider sustainability on a landscape level, a regional level, a global level. And in addition to that, we also recognize that even though for many of us in the United States, trails are often found in protected areas or parks, trails also exist outside of protected areas. And so the landscapes that we would be working in would include not just wild protected area landscapes, but also rural landscapes and urban and city landscapes as well. And then lastly, one of the things we realized is that we would need to look at different regions around the world. So for example, I work in both Costa Rica and biogeographical regions, both Costa Rica and New Hampshire. And so the tropics, the trails issues are very different than in the temperate zones. So this is the way we frame trails and sustainability. The projects that we chose for this period include a white paper, a policy paper that basically outlines and states this position or this point of view, this way of framing trails and sustainability. We also are supporting various academic papers that will be published in peer-reviewed journals. And we also, as part of both the white paper and the academic papers, have been working on a literature review. And lastly, and probably the most important project we have, which Andras will talk about, is a toolbox. So I won't say too much more about that, except that it is very much related to how we define sustainability and both the academic papers we've been working on, as well as the literature review. In terms of how this fits all into climate change and why it's one of the issues that's important to the Trails and Sustainability Committee task team, we are very much looking at issues of how trails can contribute to ecological restoration around the world. They contribute to the support for protected areas, and also how they can contribute to sustainable living in urban settings that will reduce the need for fossil fuels. So these are some of the ways that we're looking at how trails and sustainability fits into the whole issue of climate change. And that's enough of an introduction. With that, I will pass you on to Stephen Couchman, who will be talking about the Trans-Bhutan Trail as a case study.
Great. Thanks so much. Kuzuzampola, everyone, and happy Diwali. Steve Couchman, and I am filling in for Dr. Kinley Dorji, one of our members of our steering committee who was unfortunately called away on a family matter at the last minute. So I will do my best to channel Dr. Kinley this evening and telling you a little bit about the Trans-Bhutan Trail and its relation to sustainability. Just to begin, just to give a sense, some folks are not as familiar with Bhutan. It's a tiny country wedged between China and India in the Himalayas east of Nepal. for those of you who know your geography, it's a good way to think of it. It's about the same size and population as Vancouver Island, and about 38,000 plus square kilometers. This part of the world is known as the third pole. So we have the Arctic, the Antarctic, and we have the Himalaya plateau, which contains the third largest quantity of ice in the world. And that's critical for this part of the world because it also supplies water to billions of people, both in China and India. And of course, great concern around climate change. A couple of other things about Bhutan, which are significant in the realm of climate change. The first and probably most significant, it's one of only 3 carbon negative countries in the world. So Bhutan actually sequesters more carbon than it puts out. It has hydro projects. It has also constitutionally protected 60% forest cover for the country. And that's within the Constitution. And at the moment, the estimate is around 71% forest cover. Most of the forestry work here is done in community logging practices and in a sustainable way. There are in those forests about 46 species of rhododendron, one of which you can eat the flowers of, though I'm told by a doctor friend not to eat too many of them. And the species diversity is extraordinary. There are snow leopards, black-necked cranes, white-bellied herons, Bengal tigers, red pandas, and so forth. Overall, between the different species of plants, mammals, and birds, there are about 50 vulnerable species here, 35 endangered species, and 19 critically endangered species in the country. And the work we've been doing is to restore the ancient trail, the ancient trade and communications route from east to west across Bhutan. It's been, we've been underway for about 3 years now, thanks to support from the government of Bhutan and the Bhutan Canada Foundation. We've been able to restore a 403-kilometer trail through villages, through two national parks and other areas. It's quite an extraordinary mix. So it goes through cities and it also goes through very remote areas of the country. Specific to climate change and what we think about, just as some examples of issues that we're facing. The first and most practical one we've talked about previously, the intensity of the monsoon and the lateness of the monsoon. That's been quite a critical factor in this part of the world. In fact, about 2 weeks ago, a good portion of the country's rice crop was wiped out by late monsoon rains. So this is something that's above and beyond the situation of the trail. Is a concern, and it impacts our ability to create trail and to sustain trail. The other one, which is not, people don't like to talk about this in kind of sustainable tourism worlds, but to come to Bhutan takes an average of about 3 tons of carbon. Depending on where you're coming from in the world, it's a long way off from most places. And mitigating that impact of international global travel is something that's quite concerning. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We are looking at, from a trail project, carbon offset options and other approaches. But the reality is that those never quite add up to what it takes to get you where you want to go. So that's a big one. As far as the opportunities are concerned, if I haven't kind of conveyed it at this point, I'll say it straight out right now that I do believe that Bhutan is a beacon in the world for those who are concerned about sustainability and how a national government and a people respond to the need to live in a more sustainable world. I think I'm looking forward to Bhutan not being one of 3 countries in the world that's carbon negative. That's where we have to go. So it's a great opportunity to learn around policy and approach to climate change. We also are very involved in a youth program here. There's a national youth service program, which is beginning in a few years, where we'll see about 13,000 youth a year walking on sections of the trail, learning about their environment, learning about sustainability and community economic development. And of course, there is that community-based tourism approach. One of the issues with endangered species in the country right now is the tourism has stopped completely for the last 2 years, and much of the funding for protection comes from those tourists coming to the country. So that's an issue and a concern, but also a huge opportunity moving forward. So I'll leave it there. And Julian, I'm not sure who I'm passing it on to, but maybe it is Matthew. Am I right?
It is Matthew, yes.
Okay, Matthew, take it away.
Thanks, Stefan. So I'm Mathieu Roy. I'm from the Trans-Canada Trail. Just as an introduction, the Trans-Canada Trail is a long network of recreational trail, 28,000 kilometers of trail. So we're connecting basically the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean to the Arctic Ocean. We have more than 500 regional groups that are partners with Trans-Canada Trail to comprise in that network. So we have different type of setting in the trail, but we connect municipality and communities. So basically we have a lot of urban setting, rural setting, and also backcountry setting. So the Trans-Canada Trail, when you look from the angle of the impact of climate change, is a big outdoor lab where we see all the different impact in different landscape. I'm just gonna share my screen. So everyone can see the presentation also. So when we look at the impact on the trail infrastructure in Canada, we see different type of thing. And at Trans-Canada Trail, we're kind of, and I don't want to, we're privileged, and that's not the right word, to receive all the requests and being able to measure from an economical standpoint the impact of those climate change. So when we look at the north, we have a lot of trail right now that are sinking infrastructure. So the permafrost is melting down, and basically the trail is not holding up, and they need to rebuild the entire trail, find new ways to construct those trails. In the west and central, we had a lot of wildfire, forest fire over the 6 last year, and there's also short intense rainfall that lead to sliding slope. When you move towards the east, we face a huge problem of coastal erosion. So a lot of our trails are along the coastline, and the erosion are really important. So the cost of repairing the trail, keeping the coastline intact is really important. We are facing also rising level sea in some areas. So we have a lot of marshes trail through wetland, and those trails are sinking and becoming flooded. We also face extreme weather event. The hurricane that were not touching Canada in the past are not touching Canada more severely and more intensely. Last winter, we had a mega snowstorm in Newfoundland, the more eastern island of Canada, provinces of Canada. And that snowstorm led to, in some places, 2 meters of packed snow on some bridge. So the load of the snow on those bridges was too high, and bridges are collapsing. In Quebec, Ontario, we see tons of flash flood during winter. So a lot of new heavy rain coming up in January, creating flood in river that take away bridges, take away trail and infrastructure along trail system. We also see a lot of tree blowdown. It was not a huge thing in the past, but each year I have about 10, 20 tree blowdown across the country. So a tree blowdown is a huge windstorm that happens in 5-10 minutes, taking down tons of trees. So a couple of examples. So a tree blowdown, for example, this is a 10 kilometers tree blowdown that costs $1,500 per kilometer just to clear the trail. The hurricane damage that we see here for 2 kilometers, it was $15,000 per kilometers to repair. And it's not huge damage, it's just redoing surface. But that has a lot of impact on trail organization that are volunteer group that need to fundraise for that money. This is an example of a flash flood bridge that was taken out last winter in January. The cost to recover the bridge from the river and reinstall it, it's $200,000. A landslide in BC, 1 kilometer of landslide is $35,000. When we're thinking about a trail, like building a brand new trail in Canada, a gravel trail, we're talking about $100,000. So those small infrastructure the default are really becoming huge, having a huge impact from an economical standpoint for our trail group. There's also impact that we are seeing and foreseeing in the near future for us. We see change in the peak season. So the peak season was usually July, August, but now it's extending to November. So on the visitation, we need more staff to manage visitation, maintain the trail. Same thing to the change in peak hours. So people are now avoiding the period of the day that is too hot. So they are shifting their habit to come really early in the morning or really late in the evening. That changed the operational welcoming of visitors on the trail. We have lost point of interest. There's a lot of foliage due to invasive species that we're taking down and trees are taken down. So that creates a huge natural landscape point of interest that is lost. So the trail has an impact on visitation. The loss of vegetation, the trail closure also impact the revenue of the trail group. They rely on visitation to make revenue. The smoke from the wildfire also a big impact for us. Last summer, about 50% of the country during the month of July was covered with smoke and smog, with air quality index very high. And there's the eye fire risk activity that are banned during summer have a huge impact on repairing trail, maintaining trail, because you cannot go in the forest with an heavy equipment or even a chainsaw for the risk of creating new fires. So some example of the restriction, you cannot, like limitation of eye fire risk, the air quality index are really bad, like very unhealthy, a lot of days. So the Okanagan Valley got many trail system in BC. And you see those type of air quality index to extreme for weeks and weeks during summer. And this is Lac Morin in Port Canada in Alberta. So usually that's it's like a clear blue sky, you see the mountains, but this summer it was a smoky view, and that has impact on visitation. Like there's less visitor, which might be good for these places, but at the same time it has a huge impact on the campaign, the tourism economy surrounding that is financing the creation of those trails. There's some mitigation happening and good things happening. So the government of Canada announced 400 million for active transportation. There's more and more connection between urban trail and conservation. So we see a lot of good things happening. I will pass the mic back to Nat for the next speakers. Thanks.
Hello again. because we're running up against time, I'm going to try to be brief, and maybe some of these topics we can get into during the discussion. The case study that I have is related to a methodology that the Trails and Sustainability Task Team has been developing. I mentioned that we have projects that we work on between conferences, and occasionally ideas emerge during our meetings. And one of these was to develop a method that we could use so that various members, organizational members, and individuals from the World Trails Network could advise trails and organizations in other parts of the world. And we named this TRAMP, which is short for Trail Making Rapid Assessment. And that is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek name. For those of you who don't know, tramping is a reference to hiking in parts of the English-speaking world, but the name has stuck. The basic idea with the TRAMP method, it's an eclectic mix, interdisciplinary approach to rapidly evaluating trails within 1 or 2 weeks, combining various methods, including some anthropological methods of observation, participant observation, interviews, focus groups, and also various participatory planning techniques. For those of you who are familiar with work in the 1980s and participatory rural appraisal or rapid rural appraisal, it has some similarities to that. But it's an evolving methodology. I won't go into it in detail now, but we did have a chance to practice our tramping method to apply some of our concepts that we were developing in the Trails and Sustainability Task Team in Costa Rica. We spent a week hiking the Sendero Pacifico, a 60-kilometer trail. And we met in 7 different communities. We had stakeholder meetings in all of these communities, as well as a gathering of all of the communities that maintain sections of this trail along the Sendero Pacifico. We also had a chance to walk part of the Camino de Costa Rica. I'll just simply say just a couple comments on our expedition to Costa Rica. Some of the issues that emerged were deforestation and how that was affecting watersheds and water quality, and in general, the unsustainability of the cattle ranching that was occurring on much of the Pacific slope where the trail passes. The trail is also within a biological corridor linking protected areas in Costa Rica. And so it has a very high conservation value, but is also has a very high impact from the cattle ranching that occurs, and also some agricultural activities in the lower part of the corridor. And this is where we were able to engage with community members and come up with projects, reforestation and ecological restoration projects that were directly tied to the trail. Because of time, I won't go into these, but if it comes up during the Q&A, I'm happy to talk about it more. So I'd like to pass on to Julian again, and we can talk more about the tramping in the Q&A if people are interested.
Thank you very much, Nat. And there is a good report of that Costa Rica field trip, which explains a lot of the detail if you're interested in that. So I'd like to give some policy context to the network's work. So the World Trails Network promotes principles of best practice and sustainability for all trail development and trail management. So to help this, we're creating a series of white papers which outline issues and solutions to form the basis of discussions for trail-related matters important to the network. So specifically with our task team, we've started to develop a sustainability in trails white paper with the aim of publishing and promoting for next year's conference. And we see that the trails connect people to and through wild, natural, cultural and urban landscapes, helping create a sense of place. And trails also enable the development of a narrative around journeys, helping address often complex issues. However, historically, some trails in protected landscapes have been viewed with wariness as bringing management issues into special and fragile places. And today, more than ever, trails can be used to help address some of the modern challenges facing us as beacons of sustainability and exemplars of environmental growth. And there's an interesting kind of space between those two kind of statements. So as a community of trails and trail people, the World Trails Network is working to maximize the sustainability benefit of trails by sharing knowledge and experience, developing a sustainability toolbox, which Andras will talk about in more detail in a second, and setting a policy position on how trails can be developed and managed sustainably and make a positive footprint on the planet. So our white paper will set out the World Trails Network's thought on these issues around trails and sustainability as a starting point for discussion with policy makers, trail managers, and wider trail communities. And just finally, in developing the policy, we've identified key areas where trails can have a positive and sustainable impact, and specifically building resilience to climate change for trail communities and the trail corridor, using trails as vehicles to deliver nature recovery, utilizing the trail corridor to reconnect fragmented habitats and biospheres, promoting sustainable management of the trail users and wider trail corridor, offering a route to communities' health and well-being, developing and promoting sustainable trail economies, engaging trail users with sustainability issues, and protecting and conserving and celebrating the elements that make trails special, from food to culture, heritage, and the people who live and work along the trail. So having a sustainable trails network will hopefully make us more resilient to the challenges ahead, and as we address climate change impacts, mitigation, and future-proofing. So now on to Andras and the toolbox.
Thank you, Julian. In the Trails and Sustainability Task Team of the World Trails Network, we have been working on the development of the so-called Sustainable Trails Toolbox, or maybe better say Trails and Sustainability Toolbox. And this is essentially going to be a Wikipedia of trail resources. What do we mean on that? That will be especially relevant for trail managers and different stakeholders who are somehow related to trails. And the aim is to collect literature, links, and materials which can be used for improving or problem solving, or to look at best practices related to trails. One particular challenge is the globality of the scope, because we will have to deal with different languages some way, and also because we don't just want to collect the material, but to give a meaningful way of navigation or usage. That is one of the main part of our work beyond collecting the material. Just to give you an insight or an example, what we are trying to implement is that if you come to this system as soon as it is ready, you will face as a user with some questions and navigational options, and hopefully if you go through such a navigational path, you will reach a set of recommended literature or links or other resources which is relevant to your particular issue. Of course, that's not going to be the only way of navigation, and the whole system will be based on a keyword category assignment, which has a word net, a network of words under it, a terminological structure which we are developing right now. As you can see here, the three pillars of sustainability is the starting point, the core, and there are other terms which are structured and assigned under these umbrellas. And we would like to assign these taxonomy terms to the different resources. So that would be the basis of searching and navigation to the system. To put it in a more clear form, we have started to define these categories in a tree structure along basically 3 dimensions. So already mentioned the landscape characteristic, the sustainability pillar, and the scale of local landscape, which is like smaller area, regional and global scale, because we found that there are completely different topics and ways of approaching the problems on the different scales and different environments. So that's where we are now, and we are currently working on this toolbox to be at least as a demo version ready for the next World Trails Conference in October 2022. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andras. I think if people now want to switch on their videos, we should move to the open Q&A session. And Stephen, very nice hat, thank you.
Yeah. It's part of the reason why it's carbon negative here, because there's no central heating.
So first of all, if anyone has any questions, just please put up your hand and I'll try and work out who is putting their hands up first, and then see how we can answer. And also happy for all the participants to put their screens on as well now, if you'd like to join us. This is supposed to be a kind of a conversation rather than a presentation now. Welcome, Galileo. In fact, Galileo, is this now a good time, as we're talking sustainability, we're talking climate change, and we're talking COP26? Is this a good time to make an announcement by any chance?
Yes, if you want me to do that, I can do that right now, Julian. I can take us through that a little bit. So welcome and greetings to everyone. And thank you for some really great presentations so far. I've loved everything that you guys have presented, some thought-provoking stuff. I'm very pleased to announce that as of 2 days ago, the World Trails Network is a signatory and launch partner of the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism. And according to the United Nations World Tourism Organization, research has shown that tourism CO2 emissions grew at least 60% from 2005 to 2016, with transport-related CO2 causing about a 5% in global emissions in 2016. So this is a sobering thought for all of us who are engaged with tourism, and many of us have trails that are firmly embedded in the tourism sector. That we're expecting, if the recovery from tourism continues, I mean, recovery for tourism from COVID pandemic continues, we're likely to see a 25% increase in CO2 emissions off the 2016 levels by 2030. So that's only in about 8 years time, which in a sense would mean a doubling in the tourism sector since 2005. So a little worrying there. One of the things that this Glasgow declaration is looking at is a just transition to net zero before 2050, with only which will only be possible if tourism recovery accelerates in an adaptable way with sustainable consumption and production, and refines or redefines what we consider success from an economic perspective as well, while also giving attention to regeneration of ecosystems, biodiversity, and communities. Now, as signatories to this declaration, we commit to deliver in the next 12 months as the World Trails Network a program of action to reduce our climate impacts. And we also commit in this process to follow a shared pathway of five avenues. One is measurement, so to measure and disclose all travel and tourism related emissions. The second is to decarbonize where we can and to stay in alignment with what science is encouraging. And the third is to regenerate, that is to restore and protect ecosystems, supporting nature's ability to draw down on carbon. The fourth option for us, or fourth part of the path, is to share evidence of risks and solutions with other stakeholders. And I love what Mathieu shared in his presentation. It essentially does that. It shares some of the the things that we can expect to see on other trails in other parts of the world, certainly ones that are in a similar kind of climate. And lastly, the fifth option is to really look at ensure that the organizational resources are in place to sufficiently meet the objectives of our declaration. And on that note, just to end off quickly, Julian, is the World Trails Network. This is our declaration. The World Trails Network, which is a global leader in trails, is working to accelerate climate action in tourism and commits and recognizes the Glasgow Declaration on the urgency to cut CO2 emissions in half by 2030 and to reach net zero by 2050. In addition, the World Trails Network commits to communicating and fostering the role that trails play in tourism in urban areas as alternative modes of non-motorized transportation for travel purposes. And we put forward that trails are often in regions viable for landscape restoration and projects of carbon sequestration. And we also commit, in addition to that, to campaign and to raise awareness around reducing carbon footprints in trail design, construction, and maintenance. And it's on that note that maybe, Julian, I'd love to maybe kick off the discussion. The toolbox that Andras has just presented from the sustainability task team, I'm curious how one could build into some of your pathways of logic there, whether we can measure or give estimates of CO2 emissions linked to certain types of tasks that a trail might undertake that might also help them then make what one might call more climate sensitive decisions in their construction or deliberations. So maybe that's something that we can still build into that model. But I love what you guys have done so far, so thank you.
That's a very interesting question. Andras, do you want to address that directly? I mean, I've got a comment on that straight away. Maybe I'll jump in and give a comment and then pass on to Andras. In that, I think what we need to also do is be careful not to jump down the single carbon kind of measurement kind of bandwagon and actually look at wider sustainability and trying to address things so it's about our overall footprint rather than just our carbon footprint. And I think it's very, I mean, it's vital that we measure the carbon footprint, but it's also, there are other things we can do to reduce our footprint without looking at carbon. Andras.
Yeah, basically the toolbox is going to be open for any type of resources, and that would be part of the keyword structure, of course. But I just want to underline what Julian said, that usually we have to take decisions with the planning and the implementation and the management of trails. And we would like to give a broad set of resources which would support the decision making, and then people can see what they really want and what they really need, and whether the priority is the carbon footprint reduction, or there is some other maybe at that smaller location more important issues. And we would like to resolve somehow the usual conflict which comes and protect or conserve a region, an area, and with the trails, because basically if we create a trail, then it needs to do some damage, so to say, to the environment, because we are building something. But we need to see it in a broader perspective, that the existence of the trail will somehow have a greater support on the sustainability of the area, including the society, who will be able to visit the place in a sustainable way by the trail.
Okay, so if people can use it's under the reactions button, and you can raise your hand like that to ask a question. So I've got several, but I don't want to jump in too quick. So any other hands being raised here? Well, I've got a text message here from Kathleen Broderick saying, water quality is really important, protecting the water quality for consumption and the ecosystem. So maybe, Matthew, is that something which you're having to address over on the Trans-Canada Trail?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Julian?
Just a question about water quality and how it's important for not only for consumption, but for ecosystems.
Yeah, so every trail project from the development, the way we look at that with our trail organization is really is it sustainable for future generations? So that's one of the end goal that we look at new trail development. And the water management of the watershed around the trail is super important. I'll give you an example that we just faced in New Brunswick, a trail that was along a watershed that was a water supply for communities. Usage were limited to non-motorized usage. So in Canada, we have a lot of motorized ATV, non-motorized trail segment. And there were a lot of back and forward, and the decision at the end was made not to allow the ATV on that trail to make sure that there were no risk for the water to get impacted by hydrocarbon if there's an accident. So that is one of the end goals that we're looking at, but the drainage part of a trails eco is super important too. So we want to make sure that we're not, if we're adding impermeable surface, we're not adding more flow into nature and creating erosion impact that lead to sediment and etc. So there's a lot of consideration into the design taken.
Cool. Thanks for that, Matthew. Nat, you have a question.
Well, I was just going to add to the water quality. It's an opportunity to mention a specific related to the tramp expedition and the work we do in Costa Rica. So one of the issues that arose in the communities during our meetings was water quality and quantity. The quality of water, but also springs were drying up, all very much related to deforestation. When we do trail construction in a deforested landscape, we're actually, rather than further damaging, we're helping restore the landscape. Because what we do is, in addition to the trail construction, on either side, we create windbreaks that form forest corridors that then connect forest fragments that also contribute to helping protect the watershed. And in terms of Julian's comment on there are other values other than carbon that we can and should be measuring, these sorts of reforestation projects in Costa Rica support biodiversity, watershed protection, and including carbon sequestration. So there are a variety of values that are supported. And Costa Rica has a program that they call Payment for Environmental Services, where they will pay farmers to either preserve forest or reforest. And we've been able to engage with farmers combining trail development with reforestation so that we're contributing to carbon sequestration, biodiversity improvement on a landscape level, linking forest fragments. So we're increasing that also has an important factor for biodiversity. So I just wanted to give that as an example.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. And I think it's also very important to think at that landscape level as well, because people quite often think of trails as just this kind of 1 meter or 2 meter wide kind of line running through a landscape, and yet they are landscape scale features. And in certain circumstances, I mean, if you look at, say, the England Coast Path, we're talking about the whole coastal margin, which is now being designated open access for the full 2,700 miles of the coast path. That coastal margin will end up being something like 170, I think it's like 1,700 square miles of land. So that's not insignificant. And it is landscape scale. It is sort of same sort of scale, at least in England, as the national parks, or at least some of the national parks. So yeah, it's good for us to think in those kind of broader spaces. I can see a comment from Jane McGreary in the chat. Here we go. Yeah. I'm just trying to read. Jane, are you able to actually speak to us? Because you are in Scotland and we are under the banner of COP26. It would be nice to hear from you. Hey, Jane, how are you?
Hi, yeah, sure. I'm good, thank you. Yes, being based in Scotland today, it's just kind of coincidence that there is actually an event taking place today in our head office, which is in the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park. So I just put a note there in the chat. And it's looking at some similar issues, but for rural areas in particular. And one of the things in Scotland that has been being worked on is peatland restoration, and how that can have a positive impact. And the West Highland Way Trail goes through a lot of the national park, and starting just north of Glasgow, and then ending up in the Highlands further up in Fort William, for anyone who's not aware. So yeah, nice to be here and join you all today. Thank you.
Good to see you. Okay, any other burning questions? Okay, I've got kind of a couple of thoughts which would be interesting just to trial out. The first one is at the macro level, and the second one's at the micro level, so we can choose which one we go for. At the macro level, it's thinking about offsets and sequestration and how we start to try and reduce our impacts, and have we got examples within the Trails family of where that's actually been a positive environmental gain, as opposed to most of the examples I hear actually seem to be quite negative in terms of offsets. And then the second question at the tiny micro level is thinking about environmental impacts, things like using recycled plastics as part of your furniture, which a lot of people are pushing quite strongly, and we're pushing back against because we see it as just delaying those plastics going into landfill, and we'd rather be using locally sourced and sustainably developed materials. Again, is anyone finding those kind of issues arising within their trails? So I'll open out either of those questions to anyone.
Well, what I can say to you, Julian, quickly on that plastic use of, recycled plastic, timber and stuff is when it comes to fires, they're a disaster. So one of our famous trails here in South Africa, they had an entire boardwalk made out of these recycled plastic logs. And what that did when the fire came, it pushed the boardwalk, took that fire deep into the forest, where it would not have reached otherwise, because it would have been stopped by the indigenous vegetation. So that was a big wake-up call for the national park, that that type of material is not advisable.
Okay, that's, yeah. You can't argue against that, can you? It's a very strong point.
No, I won't go that far, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because there was a chance, but it's not going to happen now. But we are using them for signage posts. So just along the trail, that's a good option for us. It's also good for our local farmers on fencing for electric fences and things like that, but there will be no boardwalks built out of plastic, that's for sure. Thank you.
On our side, if we look at signage, there are some details in signage, but we switch over the last couple of years to print on vinyl and stick a vinyl on the aluminum signage to go with new technology that are printing directly on aluminum. It's still aluminum, it's still energy consumption to produce that. Yeah. But we know we need to sign trail to a minimum level. And there's wood signage, but in a context of 28,000 kilometers, it's not practical and doable to do wood signage in most of the trails. So we try to reduce the size of the wayfinder to get a minimum aluminum as possible, and print directly on the sign to reduce the plastic and the co-material that are really tough to recycle after that.
Okay. Does anyone want to try and address that bigger question about offsets and the like? I can see Laura, you're out there. Are you online thinking about? It must be an issue for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, perhaps. No. Okay.
Julian, I'll take a swing, though I don't have a specific answer. Though I have raised it as an issue when I was talking, and we are working with an organization called Bhutan for Life, which is specific around funding for those types of projects. I think there will be tree planting. I think we're also looking at some solar projects for local communities, and also some micro hydro. We've got a lot of moving water around here, so it's a step in the right direction. But I believe others on the call have more tangible experience.
Kaleo. And then Nat.
Yes, sorry to have my voice again, everyone. My brain is in overdrive at the moment. But listening to this, I personally don't have any examples of offsets or sequestration projects linked to trails specifically, but it raises for me the question whether the World Trails Network might not play a role in trying to encourage, like the example that we've seen in Costa Rica that Nat was talking about, where the program you guys did there, the corridors that you're helping to reforest during trail development. I think this is something that the World Trails Network could possibly champion in some way, or certainly engage in a campaign in relation to our declaration commitments. So yeah, I think it's maybe something we should think about as a network. How do we encourage our trails to see what kinds of reforestation or offset or sequestration programs they could engage with? And maybe we could play a role in helping them to monitor or measure that we can report back some kind of metric to the global community.
Cool. Okay, and Nat. Can you unmute?
The program that we've run in Costa Rica in the past that's unfortunately on hold because of the pandemic includes what we call volunteer vacations, where volunteers can come down and hike on the Sendero Pacifico. Specifically, we've included the option for them to offset their air impact, as well as local transportation, using a system that's locally based. There's a Monteverde Community Fund in Costa Rica runs a carbon sequestration project where they have a calculator and they take that money and they put it directly to projects in the area. And we've worked with them, and they've supported our efforts of reforestation on the trail. So volunteers actually know that this offset that they're putting in is going directly to a trails related reforestation project. And that is an incentive for people. The only other comment I just want to make is that this is really, to me, such a difficult question, because on the one hand, we could say that we should not be traveling, we should not be flying. And certainly, we have local trails, and there's great opportunities for us to enjoy and care for our local trail systems without flying all over the world. On the other hand, and again, I'll just reference Costa Rica. Costa Rica has developed an economy that's highly dependent upon tourism, international tourism. And that international tourism has directly contributed to a tremendous transformation of the country that was 80% deforested in the 1980s and is now up to 75% reforested. And that can be directly attributed in part to the policies that Costa Rica has, but that includes the economic incentives that have been, coming from tourism. So this is one of the issues that we face. International travel definitely has a negative impact. It also can contribute to changes in the landscape that support biodiversity and carbon sequestration, and that arguably are, helping us with climate change mitigation. It's a contradiction. I'm not sure what the answer is.
Thanks, Nat, for leaving that contribution. That's a good note to kind of start to draw this conversation to an end. Andras, you've got your hand up, so you have the final say before I just do a very quick wrap up.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat about the Costa Rica report, but unfortunately, Hillary, who asked this, just left now.
I've sent her a message. It's okay. So she should hopefully
Okay.
be in contact. Okay. On that note, first of all, I'd like to thank all the members of the International Sustainability in Trails Task Team today. We have both co-chairs, which is fantastic, and you've all done a wonderful job. It's interesting work, and I think as we've got COP26 happening today, it's over this week and next week. Let's watch this space and see where it goes. But I think hopefully the Trails Network is aligning itself well to be a kind of a leader in this kind of space, in making sure that we as a network can meet this challenge, because we're all going to have to make changes. This is one of the things that our Prime Minister kind of pretends that we're not going to have to make changes over the next few years, but we are going to have to make some changes in our lives, but they can be positive ones. They don't have to be negative. So looking forward to seeing you all coming forward. Obviously, we've got the conference in 2022, and we've got the next Trails Talk webinar, which is in a month's time. So thank you all very much for your contributions today. Okay. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.